Good day, everyone, and to our teacher, Miss Mariata Bocales. We are the Group 2, and we are assigned to discuss the topic Method of Paragraph Development, which is the analogy. I am Rona Shanine Romo, and my group mates are Mary Ann Bucao, Angela Melise Cañete, and John Mel Andico. So now, let's start on getting to know what is analogy.
Comparing two objects or ideas is common practice in English language, as useful in writing and literature as in everyday figures of speech. While there are so many forms of comparison, there is one literary term that encompasses most types of comparison. So this afternoon, we will be learning about analogy. What is this analogy? Why do we have it? And what are the different types of analogy? I'll be the first one to kick off and we will start with its definition. Analogy. Analogy basically means resemblance of one object to another in certain aspects. The aim of analogy is to test the candidate's ability to discover the relationship between the question pair and then to find the required pair of words which is most similar to that relationship. In short, the purpose of an analogy is to better explain and expand the idea or concept by comparing it to something else that may be familiar to it and to the reader. It teaches creative and critical thinking skills and presents a challenge that advanced learners enjoy. An analogy is a comparison between two things, and the comparison is used to determine the relationship between different sets of things. So for our example, doctor and teacher, hospital and school. So note that there is colon between two ideas. To read them, remember that one colon stands for is to, while two colons is for as. So back to our example, doctor is to teacher and hospital is to school. There are so many types of analogies. The first two that I'm going to tackle to you is about antonyms and synonyms. So antonyms, pairs that show an opposite relationship. Example, on is to off as black is to white. Girl is to boy as up is to down. Last example, night is to day as happy is to sad. Remember, antonyms, opposite relationship. This time, we have synonyms. Unlike antonyms, synonyms are pairs that show a similar relationship or have the same meaning. So example, beige is to tan as fall is to autumn. Couch is to sofa as bush is to shrub. Husband is to spouse as baby is to infant. Again, synonyms similar relationship or have the same meaning, while antonyms shows an opposite relationship.
Third type of analogy is cause and effect. In this relation, it involves a noun or a verb that leads to other word, or simply derives from one cause on one side and it's indisputably connected from the other side. Like for an example, rain is to umbrella and hungry is to eat. The cause here is rain and hungry, and the effect here is umbrella and eat. As we all know, when it get rains, we need an umbrella in order for us not to get wet. As well as when we get hungry, we need to eat in order for us not to get starved. This relation, it's simply as the pairs that show in the first word is part of the second word. For example, monitor is to computer as well as fingers is to hands. As we all know, monitor is one component or one part of a computer, as well as our fingers is part of our hand. Fifth is location. In this relation, objects are designated in their most logical location, or in here, objects where something can be found. Like for an example, fish is to sea as well as moose is to forest. We know fish belongs to the sea and can be found at the sea, as well as moose is found and belong to the forest. Next type of analogy is characteristic quality. In this relation, it describes something, or these are the analogies that check for understanding about a certain characteristic. For example, Puppies is too furry as fish is too slippery. One characteristic of puppies are being furry, and as we all know, fishes are slippery. Next type of analogy is degree. In this relation, it stated how much of a something, or the amount and level of a something, or the extent of something. And it is best by simply looking at the examples. But like this one, chuckle is to laugh, as whimper is to cry. As we all know, chuckle is a little laugh, and whimper is a little cry. But this type of analogy mostly consists of adjectives, but that does not always have to be the case. Number 8, function. In this relation, it shows how something works. As we know, some objects have designated functions. Like for an example, knife is to cut and pen is to write. As we know, knife is used for cutting and pen is function as for writing. This is already a self-explanatory type of analogy.
So next, performer and action. So in these items, a person is doing something. So what's the relationship? The relationship is a person or an animal and an action associated with them. So as you can see in the example, the first word is author. So the next word is what the author do? Yes, to write. Next word is chef. So what the chef do? Yes, to cook. So that is the sequence of performer and action. Next, the performer and object. So this is a person working with a tangible object. So the relationship is a person or animal and some objects that they associate with that person or animal. So in the example, the first word is cashier. And the next word is what the cashier associate with. Yes, cash. So the next word is plumber. And what the plumber worker associate with. Yes, pipe. So that is how the performer and object work. To solve the analogy, you must find a word that correctly completes the second pair. At first glance, the words in analogy may seem to have nothing to do with each other, but the words are always logically related. The first pair of words has a relationship similar to the second pair of words. The first step is to decide upon the relationship between first two words. Next, state the relationship. For an example, car is to tire because. And next is examine the third word. And next, select a fourth word that will make the third fourth would have the same relationship as the first, second word. And last, be ready to explain your fourth word selection.
We will be sharing to you an important tip on how to write analogy paragraph. But before that, let's get to know what is the purpose of analogy paragraph. Basically, it will serve as introductions for papers where you want to show two ideas are parallel. Second, to explain unknown or abstract concepts in terms of familiar to or easily understood by your reader. So now let's proceed with the steps for writing an analogy paragraph. Step number 1. Come up with an analogy. One half of the analogy is the subject of explanation, while the other half is the explainer. For example, if you said like growing up is like learning to ride a bike, you would be explaining something complex and subtle growing up in terms of something simple that your audience will be familiar with riding a bike. Second step, draw a vertical line down the middle of a piece of paper to divide it in half. One half you need to write there the characteristics of the explainer, while the other half is the explain. So try to match up the characteristics. For example, training wheels might be similar to having lots of supervision when you are young. Third step, write a paragraph discussing the explainer. Start with a statement like, growing up is like learning to ride a bike. Then, explain the stages of learning to ride a bike. Fourth step, write a paragraph discussing the explain. So start with the statement that gives an overview of the two shares. In the example, you might say like, growing up also involves getting greater and greater freedoms as you become more confident. Then, explain the steps of the explain in a way that it parallels the explainer. Fifth one, discuss the differences. Sometimes, there is a very important aspect of the explain that does not match up with the explainer. For example, you eventually completely learn to ride a bike, but you never stop growing and learning new things. You may want to draw attention to this important distinction. Lastly, review your choice of words for denotation and connotation. This means that you need to allure the analogies in such a way that they can lend themselves to exaggeration. Fight this tendency as it will only jeopardize your credibility. Again, these are the steps on how to write analogy paragraph. I hope that you have learned something, and let's get to the mini activity.